Mr. Chairman, how many Republicans sought pardons from Donald Trump in the aftermath of January 6th?
Well, it will come out that will come out in our hearings. I don't want to kind of get ahead of the hearings, but we have the documentation.
You have documentation of all these people?
Yes.
Are you planning to release the full depositions too of these transcripts of these depositions from the people who came?
Oh, it's a public document. Now, as to when we do it, it's still subject to a committee decision, but at some point you'll have access to all of them.
I mean, the public views are so entrenched on this issue on January 6th. How do you believe that this really changed how people view what happened on that day? And did you clear the very high hurdle that you had set?
Well, I think we told the story. We told the story about what occurred on January 6th. We told the story who invited the people here. We told of the other violent organizations who participated and actually scouted the Capitol while the speech was going on at the ellipse at the same time. So it's clear that there was more to what was occurring than just coming to a Stop the Steal rally. And some of what we presented tonight defines that as well as documented.
Do you expect former Trump White House officials or justice officials to testify in public here in the next in the public hearings? Rosen or Cipollone? Do you expect them to?
Well, it's our hope that they will. Obviously, we're a nation of laws. Our committee follows the law. We'll invite anyone who has information that they think is important to our committee. We gladly will accept them. Any information we presented tonight, if there's someone who would come under oath to our committee with a different opinion, we welcome it.
But they haven't agreed. Those individuals have not agreed.
Not at this point. Not at this point.
Who you have planning to testify in the next hearing Tuesday?
Well, we have a hearing Monday,
yeah.
Which will talk about some of the actions that went on with people to try to stop the election.
I'm sorry, everybody, we got a chairman to an error.
You'll know the network.
Congressman. She does better now. Yeah.
What time you start?
9 o'clock.
Thank you so much. Can I ask you to put the camera? Sure. How are you feeling for the first hearing, sir?
You know, I feel sad to be thrust back into these events and to have some of our colleagues not being interested in what we've found. You know, that's really my emotion right now.
Do you think what you present tonight and what you will present in the coming hearings will be able to move the needle at all?
Well, that's what I'm hoping. You know, the events we all lived through were devastating and demolishing, and it came back to me to see everybody in the room so crestfallen and shocked. You know, and there were the widows of officers who lost their lives in there to suicide. There were officers in there, including Officer Edwards, who were beaten. You know, and then we have colleagues who claim to be on the side of law enforcement who are in absolute denial about what took place. But from a forensic point of view and from a legalistic standpoint, the evening was a very powerful success for the committee, because what we laid out was the clarity of the narrative that Donald Trump absolutely refused to accept the results of the 2020 presidential election. And despite the fact that he was told by his own attorney general that all of the claims of electoral fraud and corruption were BS, and I'm putting that politely, and he was told that by the Department of Justice, by the Department of Homeland Security, he was told it by Republican officials across the country, all of them, but he was hell-bent on telling a lie to the country. And then even after 62 federal and state court judges repudiated everything that he was saying about fraud and corruption, he continued his assault on the rule of law, and it ended all the way up with this explosion of violence by domestic violent extremist groups, turning his internet-assembled crowd into a mob, an insurrectionary violent mob. So, you know, the details of it are just absolutely unrefuted, and they're irrefutable. And the fact that we have elected officials in the country who are still trying to deny the truth is shocking to me.
The committee used video clips from former administration and White House officials. I'm just kind of curious what effect you're hoping that might have to voters or people who are watching back home who are tuning in these hearings.
Well, you know, we had more than 900 witnesses of people within the Trump administration, within the domestic violent extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and the QAnon networks. We had testimony from high-ranking, mid-level, low-level government workers at the federal level, at the county level, at the state level. We hope that everybody will just listen to what the actual facts were. And what's so eerie about this moment is that there are still millions of people operating under the spell of Donald Trump.
Do you think having someone like Barr, who for a long time was very close with Trump, might convince those?
William Barr was Donald Trump's biggest and most able and most agile and rhetorically nimble defender for years. And then it was too much for him after the violence, after the assault on the rule of law, and he just couldn't take it anymore. And he said, well, you heard what he said. This is BS, this is nonsense, this is crazy stuff, and the country's got to get beyond it. And he said nothing that he has seen since has disabused him in any way of his fundamental belief that this is all nonsense.
On top of that,
On top of that, are you hoping that, I mean, the Justice Department has passed on indicting Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino. Are you hoping that this testimony...
For contempt.
For contempt, yes, for contempt. Are you hoping that this testimony compels the Justice Department, or at least moves the Justice Department, or what do you hope the Justice Department does?
I kind of don't want to enter into that game because that's really not what's on our mind. Our duty under House Resolution 503 is to deliver a report to Congress and to the American people about what happened to our democracy. And I know that a lot of people find it maddening that there are people out there who engaged in crimes who haven't been prosecuted yet. And this is one of the learning experiences for me, being part of this, that people really want to see criminal justice done. And I agree with that. I think that the people who committed crimes should be arrested, people who committed crimes should be prosecuted, and so on. But I have to tell you that our project, which to my mind is even more important, is to defend the institutions and practices of American democracy. And people have got to understand what a fragile situation we're in, with still millions of people denying the reality of these events.
Mr. Raskin, one of the things that came out here was that there were House Republicans who sought pardons from Donald Trump in the aftermath of January 6th, according to Congresswoman Cheney. What were they seeking pardons from? And how many Republicans are we talking about?
Well, I can't answer those detailed questions, but let's just focus on the fact
you guys don't know the information?
Well, I'm just not talking about that at this point. But let's focus on the fact of what we revealed this evening, is that there were members of Congress seeking proactive presidential pardons for their involvement in these events. That's an extraordinary statement. I mean, it's hard to find a more explicit statement of consciousness of guilt than looking for a pardon for actions you've just taken, assisting in a plan to overthrow the results of a presidential election. I mean, look, this is about the votes of Americans. This is about our democracy. You know, are we actually going to have votes for president that then get transmitted into the Electoral College, and then the winner in the Electoral College actually gets to take office? Or are we going to have political elites unleashing mobs in order to try to attack the result of the election and seize the presidency? That's what's at stake for America.
Were there any members of the leadership who were part of these discussions,
no,
asking for pardons?
You know, you continue to be an impressive reporter, but I can't answer any detailed questions on any of that at this point.
Coming out at some point?
Again, I don't want to answer any further questions about that point.
How important was it to have Vice Chairwoman Cheney giving, she gave a fairly long opening statement? Why was it important for her to lay out the way that these hearings would go, the character of each hearing? Why was it important to have her specifically as the top Republican on this committee speaking? I know that you two disagree on a lot, but you also have a very close relationship as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, this is the most bipartisan committee I've ever served on. You notice that we didn't have Democrats and Republicans engaging in partisan diatribes and denunciations. We actually are a committee where everyone is working towards a common end. And so it has a very different feel than the committees that you see pretty much every day in Capitol Hill, where you come in and then the two sides start going after each other. I'm putting it charitably there, okay. Look, Liz Cheney is a great lawyer. She's an awesome lawyer. She also knows, well, you know, she was the chair of the House Republican Conference. She was the #3 ranking Republican in Congress, so she obviously knows the terrain better than anyone else on the committee, except for Adam Kinzinger, who's also an extremely impressive member of the committee and has contributed so much. So, you know, we decided early on we wanted to have a chair who represented the majority, a vice chair who represents the minority, and we want both of them to speak to America. And I think that both of them did a terrific job tonight laying out where we're going to be going over the next several weeks so people understand. This is a story about a fundamental attack on democratic institutions and it became inescapably, inevitably, a violent attack on democratic institutions as every other effort that Donald Trump engaged in failed.
Have any of the former Trump White House officials agreed to testify publicly in these committee hearings?
You keep on wanting to talk about future hearings. I still want to focus on this hearing because you know why? Those are my marching orders. Let me announce right now to save us some time. I'm not answering any specific questions of detail about what's going to happen in the future hearings.
One of your Democratic colleagues just told me maybe the impeachments would have gone different than the Thompson letter. What do you make of that?
So, well, yeah, perhaps. It's hard to know. We've gotten a lot more information over the last year, and we've been able to have more than 900 witnesses. And Donald Trump was impeached in the House of Representatives twice, and the 57 to 43 vote in the Senate was the most sweeping bipartisan vote to convict an impeached president in American history.
Your colleague was proud of you guys, but he was praising you many times. What did you think of the chairman tonight?
I thought it was extraordinary, and it was a very powerful elucidation of what America has to see here. People saw the madness on January 6th. There was method in the madness, and the method in the madness was to try to coerce Vice President Mike Pence to single-handedly, extra-constitutionally, and unlawfully nullify electoral college votes, to try to kick the whole thing into the House of Representatives for a so-called contingent election, which they knew they could win because the GOP has a majority of state delegations. Or it could just be seized at that point. In any event, every effort that Donald Trump attempted to overthrow the Electoral College by failed. I mean, first they went to court, and of course that failed, and that was perfectly lawful. That was his right. But all that showed was that their claims of electoral fraud and corruption were nonsense. So then they went to the state legislatures, and we're going to show that that was an attempt to get the legislatures to void out their own practices and the result of the popular election and just install Trump Electoral College votes. And when that failed, they went after the state election officials, like Brad Raffensperger, to tell them just to divine votes, invent votes, materialize votes. And when that failed, well, then that's when they began to get very desperate. They talked about having the military seize the election machinery and rerun the election, because everybody knows about that provision in the Constitution which allows the military to seize the election machinery and rerun the election, right? But then, when that failed, that's when everything came down to the attack on Vice President Pence and the Congress in joint session under the 12th Amendment.
Seeing that swarm go up, what if that swarm had firearms, which many of them talked about?
Yes. Well, look, we are in the middle of the struggle to defend democracy, and there is an insurrectionist philosophy at large in the land now. We have colleagues who say we can't regulate in the interest of gun safety because the Second Amendment gives people right of insurrection against the government, which is specifically refuted by multiple provisions in the Constitution. So I hope that we will be able to dispel the insurrectionist philosophy. But you're right, there are those people who think that you can find on the extremist websites people saying that the only mistake they made was not bringing their weapons with them.
Congressman, can I ask
leaving them back in the hotel rooms.
One of the things that was revealed today was that Congressman Scott Perry, who's a current member of Congress, asked for a presidential pardon in relation to these election subversion efforts. It was also mentioned that there were other members of Congress who asked President Trump the same thing. Who are those members?
Well, you guys have common interests here. But we're not revealing that tonight.
Will you be revealing it?
I'm not even revealing what we're revealing. So, we're really, I understand everybody's anticipating this stuff, that's great, but we want to focus on what we just heard and the testimony that we have this evening.
But do you feel safe serving in this body with people who asked a former president for a pardon because they presumably knew what they were doing was illegal? Do you feel safe being here?
Well, you know, a request for a pardon would indicate consciousness of guilt, or at least likely consciousness of guilt or consciousness of likely guilt. In any event, to ask the president for a pardon for something you just did would suggest you're very nervous about what you just did.
Mr. But you know, given that Scott Perry has been subpoenaed by this committee, and the committee, he's obviously not complying with that subpoena, what is your preferred way of trying to enforce that subpoena? Should he be held in contempt of Congress for defying your subpoena?
Yeah, I mean, I can't enter into the specifics of what we're doing with respect to particular cases at this point. I mean, I just want to focus on the good news for a second. The vast majority of people we asked to come and testify, regardless of their politics or position, consented and cooperated with the committee. And there's a relative handful of people, maybe around a dozen, who have blown us off. And they have violated the law, and they've acted in contempt of Congress and the American people. And they also are dishonoring themselves in the eyes of their fellow citizens. So that's profoundly unfortunate. But our job here is not to go off on a lot of wild goose chases, but to focus on what happened. And so we have referred multiple people for contempt, as you know. And right now we are focused on conducting our hearings for the American people to see what happened. So then I'm going to have to go for
With the way that the hearing was packaged today with debaters and stuff, is there any concern that some of those witnesses might say, oh, they took me out of context if we didn't see some of the full context? Is there any concern about that by the committee? Will you guys release the full transcripts at some point?
But I believe that our rule for this hearing involved the release of the transcripts of the depositions for this evening. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I believe that all of them are available, so people will be able to read them and to, you know, put everything in context. But we have no interest in misleading anybody about anything. We want the truth out, and as you can tell, these are witnesses who are very eager to come and tell the truth and to talk about their experiences.
Congressman, the Republicans are dismissing this as a political stunt, as nothing more than a political
Well, they're certainly the
advertising
experts
campaign.
on that, yeah.
Just what's your response to that?
Well, let's see. We, you know, unlike the GOP caucus, we are a bipartisan committee, and we are a bipartisan committee that is devoted to getting the facts. And we are going to tell the American people the facts. The people who are criticizing this as a partisan exercise are criticizing us from a completely partisan perspective. And these are people who originally said that they wanted an independent outside commission to investigate January 6th and pulled the plug on it when Donald Trump expressed his opposition. Then those people opposed both the independent outside commission and the select committee engaging in a factual inquiry. So, you know, who are you going to trust? The bipartisan committee that is interested in going out and getting the facts and that is opening everything up to the American people, or those who want to sweep everything under the rug, as Leader McCarthy said he didn't want to do originally, and then he changed his mind. He promised his caucus this would not be swept under the rug. He sent his emissary, Congressman Katko, to negotiate with chairman of our committee, Chairman Thompson, and they came back with a proposal. You know what the proposal was? 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, equal subpoena power, equal staff, everything split right down the middle. Based on the 9/11 Commission, independent outside commission, and no politicians. So the Democrats agreed to precisely what the Republicans offered, and one person objected. Do you know who it was? Donald Trump. And so they had to walk it back, and they pulled the plug on the entire thing. So that tells you what their interest is in the truth of this matter. Essentially nothing. Donald Trump is still out there telling the big lie all of the time, and they are covering up for him.
Are you worried the public has January 6th fatigue? Is this going to achieve what you want it to achieve?
Hey, I mean, I've got January 6th fatigue. We've all got January 6th fatigue. But you know what we're not tired of doing? Fighting for American democracy. And this is about defending our democracy every day we go to work. So I certainly wish that, you know, our colleagues would join us, but if they don't, that's their decision. But we're going to fight for democracy, and we're going to prevail, because too many generations of American patriots have shed blood and sweat and tears for democratic institutions, and we are not going to surrender them to a bunch of lies.
Can you talk about your choice of book?
We're-
Is that yours?
The Great Common Sense?
Yeah.
I wish it were mine. I just own it. I didn't write it.
No,
Yeah,
no,
so,
no.
yeah.
I mean, that would be notable. For many
This is
reasons,
my
certainly.
copy, yes.
Why do
Yes,
you have it tonight? I mean, it feels like a very foundational text to have on such an auspicious night.
For just that reason,
You
yeah.
spoke about Thomas Paine a lot during impeachment also.
Yeah, well, he brings me good fortune, so I keep him close to my heart. My son was named after Tom Paine, so yeah. All right, thank you all. Thanks so much, Chuck.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
That was what I spotted it there.